Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to launch our very first EC2 instance, so you're about to take your first step into a much larger world. So because this is a lab, you're going to need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am, I'm logged into the AWS console. Choose a region that's closest to you. Remember, if it is a new region, that might mean that you won't see all EC2 instance types in terms of the different families. So London is very new at this stage. But for the purposes of this course, we're always going to be using T2 micros. But if you do want to see the Dr. McGift picks, different instance types, then you want to do it in an older region, something like US to East North Virginia. So I'm going to just leave it on London, and then I'm going to go down to Services, and I'm going to click on EC2. And you can see here I've got 0 of everything apart from my default security group. So I've got no running instances, no dedicated hosts, no volumes, no key pairs, etc. I'm going to learn about what every single one of these items are throughout the rest of this section of the course. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and launch an instance. So we do that by clicking here and go Launch Instance. So here we can see all our different Amazon machine images, or AMIs, and these are basically snapshots of virtual machines that you can then provision and boot up. So we've got a whole bunch of different flavors here. We've got the Amazon Linux AMI, we've got Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7.3, we've got SUSE, we've got Ubuntu, we've got Microsoft Windows Server 2016, and the actual version numbers of these will change throughout the year, but they always update them. And then next to them you'll see HVM, or if we have a look down we might be able to see PV, which stands for Paravirtual. Can't actually see any here, but there's two different types of virtualization. There's HVM and then there's Paravirtual, and we'll discuss what that means a little bit later on in this section of the course. For all of this course though, we're going to be using the Amazon Linux AMI. The reason for that is it comes with a whole bunch of pre-built-in tools, including Python, Ruby, Perl, Java, and most importantly the AWS command line tools. So we'll be using the Amazon Linux AMI for the rest of this course. If you do want to have a look at all the different ones, you can click on free tier only. This will make sure that you always stay within free tier. But I'm just going to unclick that and I'm going to click on Amazon Linux AMI, go ahead and hit select. Okay, so these are our different instance types that we can choose. And you can see down here your type. Now I mentioned that I'm up in London right now, so I'm not going to see all of the Dr. McGift picks instances, but I will see the most common ones. So we've got our T2 micro, we've got our M4, and remember M is the main choice for application servers. We've got our C for compute, we've got our X for extra extreme RAM, as I like to say. We've got our D for density, etc. So go through and see if you can remember what each of those stand for. But again, once you're finished, just click on T2 micro and go ahead and hit next, configure instances. And in here, this is basically the main setup page for EC2. So this is where we're going to define our, our setup configurations. So we configure our instance details. So we've got the number of instances. I'm going to leave that as 1 for now. We've got our purchasing options. So in here is where we set our price. So we can do this in dollars per hour or cents per hour. So if you put 0.1, that would be 10 cents per hour. In here we've got our request, when's it valid from and when's it valid to, and in here we've got whether it's persistent. So valid from is basically, you could say this is valid from Friday night at midnight all the way through to Sunday morning at 5 a.m. And persistent request is, you could say, I want this to run every single weekend, so that you're always setting this bid price for the spot instance. Now I know what you're thinking, what about the other forms of EC2 pricing? How can I do dedicated hosts? Just unclick this, and if you click down here, you've got tenancy. You can go dedicated host, launch this instance on a dedicated host, but I'm going to leave this as shared because we only want to use shared hardware. Okay, so in here we've got our network. So we've got a VPC, and you can see it says here default, and you can't click on anything else. Now you can go in and create a new VPC. VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud. And if you remember from the 10,000 foot overview, it's just a virtual data center in which you're going to provision your resources. We do have a whole section on VPCs later on in the course, and it is so important for you to understand how to create VPCs from memory in order to go in and pass any of the associate level exams, but we will cover that off later. Now when you first create an AWS account, each region has a default VPC created from the beginning, so you don't have to worry about creating your own default VPC. VPC. So just leave it as a default VPC. Subnets are basically which availability zone that you want to put it in. A subnet is just a CIDR address block range, and if that doesn't make a lot of sense to you, don't worry, we're going to do it again in the VPC section of the course. But what I really want you to remember is you can see that this subnet is equal to this availability zone, this subnet is equal to this availability zone. One subnet is always equal to one availability zone, so you cannot have one subnet that goes across multiple availability zones, and that comes up so often in the exam. So just remember, going into the exam, one subnet equals one availability zone. And again, we're going to start deep diving into the networking components of AWS in the VPC section of the course. For now, just leave everything as default. We want to auto assign a public IP address, so we'll leave that there. IAM role, we'll just leave it for now, but if you do remember in the Identity Access Management lab right at the end, we created this S3-admin access role. We're going to use that later on in a couple more labs, but for now just leave this as none. Shutdown behavior, basically you can specify the instance behavior when an OS level shutdown is performed. Is the instance going to be terminated, or is it going to be stopped? So if I shut down my Linux virtual machine, are we going to kill that instance off, or are we just going to stop it? I'm just going to leave it as stop. Enable termination protection. This basically allows you to stop people from accidentally terminating your instance. Let's just turn that on for now, and we'll just see how we can turn it off later on. Monitoring, so we have different types of monitoring. We've got normal monitoring, which is done every 5 minutes. So this will be monitoring things such as your CPU utilization, your disk I/O, your network in and out, for example. And it can either be done every 5 minutes or every 1 minute. To turn it on every 1 minute, you just click this box, and that's called detailed monitoring, but additional charges will apply. So let's just leave it for now. We're going to cover off CloudWatch later on in this section of the course, and we've already gone through tenancy. Down here in advanced details, this is where you can pass bootstrap scripts to your EC2 instance. So you can tell your EC2 instance to go and download PHP, go download Apache, install Apache, go ahead and start up the Apache service, and then make sure the Apache service always remains on even if the EC2 instance reboots. We're going to have a whole bootstraps section of the course later on in this section of the course. So for now, we're just not going to put anything in there. Go ahead and hit next to add storage. Okay, so this is our volume type. You can see it's a root, so this is our root volume. Now, if you remember, we can have only 3 different types of root volumes. We've got our general purpose SSD, which is GP2. We've got our provisioned IOPS, which is IO1, and then we've got magnetic, and this is just our magnetic boot volume. And then we can add new volumes in here. We can specify, different volume types again, and this is where we get things like cold HDD, which is SC1, and throughput optimize, which is ST1. But remember, these two cannot be boot volumes. If you want a magnetic boot volume, it's just got to be plain magnetic. I'm going to go ahead and just hit the delete button over here because we don't want an additional volume at this stage. And I'm going to leave everything as default, and you can see here it's going by default, the checkbox delete on termination is ticked. Now again, this can be a popular exam topic. What happens if you delete an EC2 instance? What happens to the EBS volume that's attached to that EC2 instance? Well, by default, it's going to be deleted because delete on termination is always checked. And by the way, in case you're just struggling with the word volume, volume is just a virtual hard disk in the cloud. So this root simply means it's where you're going to boot your operating system from. That's all we mean by root device volume. It's where you're going to boot Windows or Linux from. So we'll leave everything as default. We'll leave it as an 8 gig size. Go ahead and hit next. Now in here we've got our tags. So what are we going to call this web server? Let's call it my EC2 web server. And then we can add additional tags. So in here we could say department. And what department is this? Let's say it's the developer department. And then we can add another tag. So in here we could say team, and this could be the R&D team, for example, R&D. And then even in here, just to further drill down, we could do staff ID. So who has created this virtual machine? And then you could just enter in your staff ID in there. Now tags we will explore later on, but they really help you to control cost and to see where your costs are coming from. So the ideal scenario is with AWS, you tag everything and you tag as much as possible. You don't just tag the name, but you tag down. So you say department, team, staff ID, etc. So go ahead and hit next. Now security groups are just virtual firewalls. That's all you need to remember. Basically it's a firewall, but it's virtual. Right now we're going to create a new security group because we've never used EC2 before. I'm going to call this security group my web DMZ, so it's my web server demilitarized zone. I'm going to put that in as its description. And in here, these are our rules. So what do we want this web server to allow? What kind of traffic do we want to allow through to anything that sits behind this security group? So I want to be able to SSH into it because I want to be able to go in and install like Apache, for example, which is allows us to view websites or to host websites on our web servers. We also want to be able to view the website. So we want HTTP. So again, the great thing about this is that you don't need to know your individual ports. So it automatically, when you select HTTP, it's going to say it's on port 80. And in here, we probably also just want HTTPS, just for argument's sake. So go ahead and do SSL as well. And then your source in here, what's really cool is you can say anywhere. So in here is your CIDR address range. We will cover that off in the VPC section of the course. But what I want to show you is if you click on My IP, you can actually restrict SSH down to your individual IP address. So this /32 means that only this IP address can access this web server or this security group using SSH. So for security, you might want to do that if you don't have a static IP address, that is to say if you're on broadband or if you're using your cell phone and your IP address changes, depending on when your router or cell phone reboots itself, you might just want to make this, from anywhere. So from 0.0.0.0, which basically means from anywhere. If you do have it coming from anywhere, you're always going to get a little warning message saying that anyone can access it. So it's entirely up to you, but don't forget we're probably only going to have this instance live for about 5 or 10 minutes before we terminate it, so we can allow this to come from anywhere. Go ahead and hit review and launch. Again, you're going to get this warning message, but you can review everything else. So it's just saying that it's open to the world for SSH, and you can review the security group down here. But here is where you can review everything that we've just configured, and when you're ready, hit launch. Now what you will have to do is create a key pair. So you have a public key and a private key, and if you think of a public key as a padlock, the private key is the key that basically unlocks that padlock. So your public key, you can have the same public key on multiple EC2 instances. So you're just putting a padlock on all your virtual machines in the cloud, and then with your private key you have the one private key, and then you can use that one private key to unlock all these different padlocks in the cloud. Now what you don't want to do is create a copy of your private key and give that out to other people, because those other people could then obviously go in and unlock your EC2 instances and then hack your website. So that's the easiest way to visualize public key and private key cryptography. It is a hell of a lot more complicated than that, but at a very high level, that's really what public keys and private keys are. So what we want to do is go in and we want to create a new key pair, and we just want to call this my EC2 key pair, something like that. And now what you want to do is download it. Click download, and that will save to your downloads directory. You're going to need this file later. So once you've done that, go ahead and hit launch instances, and there you go. Your instances are now launching, and we can view the launch log up here. More importantly, just click down on view instances and you can see that it's starting to boot up. So the instance state right now is pending. This has been launched in EU West-2A availability zone. The type is a T2 micro. This is my name over here. So it's called my EC2 web server. And if we actually click on it, we can click on down here and look at tags. So we've got all our different tags that we set. So department, name, staff ID, and team, for example. If we go back up here, you can actually make this bigger or smaller by clicking these little icons over here. So you've got your description in here, and you'll be able to get your public IP address, and this is what you're going to use to SSH into your EC2 instance. Now, in order to SSH in, you're either going to be using a Windows PC or a Mac, or a Linux PC. If you're using a Linux PC, just go into your shell, and I'll show you what to type. If you're using a Mac, you'll need to do the following. Okay, so I'm just gone into Finder. All you need to do is click on Applications, and then you scroll down, go to Utilities, and then just go to Terminal, and that will open up your terminal window. Now, what you need to do is go to the directory where you downloaded your private key. So for me, it was in the Downloads directory. I'm going to make a directory called SSH, which is where I'm going to basically store all my keys. And then what you want to do is you just want to move your key. So mine was called my EC2, and you can actually EC2 key pair, and you can just hit the tab button to autocomplete to my SSH directory. And so now if I go into my SSH directory, I can type ls, and you can see it in there. So my EC2 key pair.pem. So I'm just going to clear the screen. And what's really important is you need to change the permissions on this. So you need to go chmod and then 400 and then my EC2 key pair.pem, and basically that's just locking your private key down so that you can use it in order to SSH into your EC2 instance. Now, if you are a Windows user, we do have an entire lecture on just how to connect using PuTTY, because it's a little bit more complicated. You need to download PuTTY keygen, convert your PEM file to a PPK file, and then you need to connect in there. So that will be it as an optional lecture in the next lecture. So if you are using Windows, go ahead and watch that now. So I'm just going to clear the screen now, and if you just go back to the AWS console and grab your public IP address, we're going to connect into this EC2 instance. So all you need to do is type SSH EC2-user @ and then paste in your public IP address, and then you want to log in using your my EC2 key pair. So just type the name of your private key in there and hit enter, and it will say that it can't be established. You basically, do you want to continue connecting because we can't establish the authenticity of this host? Just type in yes or a little y, and there you go. You've logged into your Amazon Linux AMI. And so straight away we can see here 5 packages needed for security out of 9 available. Run sudo yum update to apply all updates. So what I want to do is just elevate my privileges to root level. So I'm going to say sudo su, so make myself a super user. And there we go. Now you'll see my username has changed from EC2-user to root. And for all the Linux sysadmins out there who are tearing their hair out right now, I'm sorry, but we have to make this accessible to everyone. A lot of people who do this course have never logged into a Linux instance before. So we're trying to make this as easy as possible. So we've elevated our privileges to root. Let's just clear the screen, and we're just going to apply our security updates now. So all we want to do is run yum update and then -y to force an update. So yes. And there we go. It is now updating our operating system, and it's applying all the security patches there. Just to test that this has all worked, maybe we want to go ahead and make this a little web server. So it will just say hello cloud gurus. So we'll wait for these updates to finish applying, but then what we want to do is go in and install Apache. Apache will make sure that our little EC2 instance becomes a web server, and then we're going to create a little web page just to say hello cloud gurus. So that's finished being done now. So all I want to do is write yum install and then httpd, so that's Apache, and then -yes. So it's gone in and installed Apache. So then we need to go to our var. So we go to cd/var/www/html and hit enter, and hit ls to see what's in that directory. Nothing's in there right now. So all we want to do is create a little file. So we'll type in nano, which is a text editor, and we're going to call it index.html. And in here we'll do quick little bit of HTML, so we'll just do HTML, and then we won't bother with any other headers. We'll just do H1, and then we'll just say hello cloud gurus. And you could just write hello cloud gurus in here. You don't need to do any HTML. It's entirely up to you. So end our header and end our HTML. go ahead and hit Control X, which is going to exit, and it says, do you want to save your changes? Hit yes, and then it will ask you what file name you want to write to. Hit enter, and that's it. So far we've created a website, we've installed Apache, and we've updated our kernel, so we've got all the security updates applied to our OS. The very last thing we need to do is start Apache, so you just type in service httpd start, and there we go, it's started. Now the next thing I want you to do is go over to your web browser and copy and paste the public IP address that you use to connect to your EC2 instance into it. Okay, so here I am in my web browser. I'm just going to paste in this public IP address, and if I move the mouse down, you can see here it says Hello Cloud Gurus, so I can now see my little web page. So that is it for this lecture, guys. You've done really well. What you've done is you've created your very first EC2 instance in the cloud. You've then SSH'd into it, you've applied security patches to it, you've turned it into a little web server, and you've made a web page that you can browse to anywhere in the world. Okay, that concludes part 1 of our lecture. In the next part, we're going to go through, have a look at some different options in the EC2 console around our newly created EC2 instance, and then we're going to go ahead and terminate that instance and review what we've learned. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.